Welcome to the Professionals of the Inland Empire show with your host, John Tulac.
And welcome to another edition of Professionals of the Inland Empire, which we affectionately call PI. I'm John Tulac, international business attorney located in Claremont, California. I'm the host of this podcast, and it's my pleasure to interview really outstanding people in their respective fields. Primarily we've been interviewing lawyers and accountants and bankers as business consultants. Today we have something a little bit different, something very special. I would like to introduce a very good businesswoman and friend of mine through Rotary, Beatrice Cazagran, who runs Ophelia's Jump, which is a local theater company and venue that is near the Cable Airport. So this is a professional in a field that's entirely different from what we've been doing, but stay tuned. This is going to be really a lot of fun. So for the next half hour, help yourself to a slice of pie. Here we go. Beatrice, thank you for being on the podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself first, and then how Ophelia's Jump came to be, and all about Ophelia's Jump. In that order, if you like, or you can mix it up.
No, I guess I have to point out that that you can't seem to get away from the lawyers, because I am one. I'm a recovering attorney. So part of how I ended up at Ophelia's Jump is that I always have done theater since high school. Didn't know enough to consider a career in theater. Actually, it would have been something that my Cuban immigrant parents did not feel was a worthy endeavor. So I did lots of it through college, but ended up getting a law degree. And then, oh gosh, long time ago now, my husband got sick in his mid-30s. We went through kind of a life-changing scare, terrible situation. And I realized life's short. So I started teaching and then went back and got a degree in theater, a master's in theater, and eventually ended up founding Ophelia's Jump, which was what I always wanted to do. So there you go.
So tell us about Ophelia's Jump.
Ophelia's Jump is a nonprofit theater company founded by myself and my daughter and my poor husband, who doesn't get enough credit, but he was along for it too. He suffers through it. It's a woman-founded theater that has always striven to tell universal stories, but to give truly real access to all sorts of people that don't have access. And I don't mean that. I mean to the entire theater canon, and all the beautiful, universal, wonderful stories of the world, including Shakespeare and including Bracton, including everything. But cast with people, whoever shows up, who has just the best energy and really seems to be, filling the room in that role for me. And we also hire lots of young people and train them, mostly from junior colleges. And so we provide hands-on training and a lot of networking for these young people to go on and have careers in entertainment.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about is there like an underlying philosophy to Ophelia's Jump and what you do, how you do it? I know that the offerings are quite eclectic. Some involve controversial topics, some are classical things like Shakespeare, but sometimes with a very interesting angle, either in terms of the era in which it's staged, or a change in the approach to something. You've got comedies, you've got dramas, you've had musicals. Is there a secret sauce to how Ophelia's Jump picks and chooses the productions?
This It's a group of
Can you
artists.
spell that for me?
It has M's and F's. Maybe a B. I think that the unifying factor is that I love good stories. I'm an immigrant to this country. And my parents came here when I was just a few months old. I love literature. I love literature in Spanish. I love literature in English. I love literature in French. I love stories. And when you put them on their feet and they become drama, I think they become even more powerful. And that's always been how I felt about them. I like to tell those classic stories or new stories, it doesn't matter. Stories that to me seem to touch on some truth. And I like to often look at ways to tell them from perspectives that are maybe different. I think that generally it's changed a lot in the last, couple decades. But women were not given the chance, right? I have King Lear on my bucket list. And if I ever get back on stage someday, I will do that. And it's happening now. It was happening much less when I started. But giving people access to be able to play those great roles, whatever they are. I also have I thought it's been important to be able to promote the work of women playwrights. That's not, I mean, like I said, we've done Brecht, we've done we've done tons of Shakespeare. When I did Shakespeare, for example, my Hamlet had really kind of focused on the different outcomes for women who were either part of the patriarchal power structure versus those who were not. I have an interesting PhD that I never did in theater, but I have always been interested in the thread that I think you can follow through history, where often the women that we hear about, the women who actually were able to leave a dent in outside of beyond, before modern era, were either most of them were unmarried, either because they had been put in a convent, or they were lesbians living in circumstances that nobody talked about, but that's who they were. They had not become chattel. They figured out they were outside. They were not valued maybe for their looks because they didn't have any. And those were the women who we hear about and were able to achieve great things. And so in Hamlet, the focus was sort of moved to the juxtaposition of Gertrude and Ophelia. Gertrude in power, Ophelia, who is just the quintessential bride, and then I made Laertes a sister, a lesbian sister, suffragist, who's off in Europe, and it was really interesting to me to do all the research for that. I think it changed the dynamic, and brought out Ophelia's story, which is often big portions of it are cut or censored. So that's an example of how Ophelia's Jump might do a very traditional, my favorite Shakespeare play. It has everything. It has humor and everything, but somewhat bring out aspects of it that are not as pronounced in another production. That is Ophelia's Jump.
So I would call that secret sauce. And I know you've got Hildegard of Bingen coming up in
Yes.
the upcoming season. And of
Yeah.
course, she was a mystic and an incredible writer of music, and was quite the leader of her order at the convent she was in.
She is fascinating. Again, she was put in religious life, so she was not in the regular paradigm of marriage and patriarchy. But there's also some very interesting scholarship that proposes that she may have been neurodiverse, that she may have been on the spectrum. She had a lot of ailments that would fall in line with what we now call neurodivergent autism spectrum type stuff. And there's a couple of articles that posit that perhaps a monastic life that she was put in, the kind of the kind of training that she received with Utah, her mentor and everything, actually is stuff that that they're finding really works with people on the spectrum nowadays. And so that kind of like this confluence of things happen that actually allowed her to really shine. And obviously she was a genius in many respects. Her artwork is insanely amazing. You look at I'm not a fan of medieval artwork. For the most part, I think that it all looks alike. And then you look at
Pretty
Hildegard's artwork.
flat, actually, until
Yes,
perspective came along.
Hildegard's artwork I mean, it looks something like Mayan. It looks indigenous. It looks modern in a lot of ways. It's kind of amazing. And it was these visions that she had that she would put on paper. But yeah, she's wild. That's another thing. I love when I was an attorney, the part of being an attorney I loved was when I had to become an expert in something new, right? And it didn't happen often enough. But in theater, whenever I discover a new, genre, or a new character, a new era, that happens, and it's just it really keeps my crank going. Yeah.
I completely understand that. And business people, and we've featured this on some prior episodes, the importance of storytelling in your business can't be overemphasized. Every business person has a story to tell.
Yes.
And when you can then personalize it in a way that makes it relatable to your customer, then you have a way of bonding your company and your product or your service with your intended audience. And of course, theater, that's what you all live for, right? Is to make that experience on stage seem so real. Your audience is just caught up in it. They're bound up in the story.
Yeah, well, you and I have talked about, I think business is about people, right? And when it's not, there's something wrong. Um, you and I have had this conversation quite a lot, I think, or iterations of it. Um, s- Stories, I like stories, sharing stories, but I like sharing stories that surprise, that enrage, that bring up questions, that get people talking, because I think that's really important, making those connections. And they're not always connections of escapism. Sometimes they're that Albee mirror that Albee talks about holding up to society. And sometimes it's that kind of connection. And it's a little bit uncomfortable. They're all valid to me, and they have they have a purpose, and I think a very important purpose in our society, to keep people thinking and talking and challenging things.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll digress for just a second since we've gone so far back in time with Hildegard. Chaucer was, and still to this day, is widely viewed by those who study literature as the first secular writer in the English language. But there was a woman who lived in Claremont for many years. Her name was Dolores Cullen. And late in life, she went back to school to get a master's, and she became fascinated with Chaucer. She ended up writing and having to self-publish because she literally got censored. 4 books about how Chaucer was really a religious author. And she took apart all of Canterbury Tales and all the other things that he wrote and said every single one of these ties back to very strong religious themes. And they tried to get her expelled from the PhD program because she wasn't towing the line to this is our first secular author in
Interesting.
English. Her books are out
Interesting.
of print, so if you love Chaucer and you can find one of her books, ladies and gentlemen, it's worth grabbing.
Cool.
And
I
go
No, go
ahead.
ahead. No, it just brings to mind that um Hildegard, um so I mean, she was steeped in religion, obviously, and yet a lot of her ideas are science based for the time, and they read almost as modern spiritualist. And it's kind of interesting. And they were not considered heretical or anything. In fact, she thought she was fighting heretics. But because they were channeled through her own visions, this way of seeing life, and the idea of being in the green, this spiritual connection that includes nature. Very pantheistic. I'm like, don't say it, but it's just that it's also the same kind of thing where you have somebody that is not that's not walking, not coloring in the lines, and I like that.
Exactly.
That's very interesting.
As it turns out, the other connection that my family has to Hildegard, of all people, is that my youngest needed to choose a confirmation name, and she wasn't particularly engaged in that process, but she finally got into it and chose Hildegard.
Oh, wow,
And
cool.
I said, so why did you choose Hildegard? She said, it was the longest name I could find. But
Is
then
your first name Anne or something? I don't know what you're.
she was always a very creative one, but then she got into Hildegard's story. And she came back and said, I really chose very well for myself. Yes, because there's really good fit here. Very creative young woman to this day. And so it's funny how these things happen. They always seem to happen for a reason. Sometimes the reasons come up after the fact. But I think that's part of the fun of theater is that you go for the performance, but you come back with a revelation that can be completely out of the blue, unexpected, no seeming connection to what you thought you were going to go see.
Yeah, or at least a desire to know more. Um, this musical is not, it incorporates some of Hildegard's music and concepts. Obviously, In the Green comes from her concept of greening, but it's a made up origin story for her, and about topics that were important to the composer. But I can imagine, I think that people are going to go away and want to know more about Hildegard, which I think is cool. I think everybody should keep learning and reading. Don't stop
Absolutely.
reading.
Lifelong learners are the ones who are happiest, right? I certainly believe that. So again, the podcast is about professionals of the Inland Empire. And so I want to turn our attention to the fact that when you are in theater, you are a professional. And one of the things that distinguishes Ophelia Jump from community theater, as you explained to me, is that you hire people. These are not just volunteers or wannabe actors out of work that will take anything just to be up on stage. You actually are hiring people. They are professionals, and this is part of their resume in a business way, not just I'm building a portfolio, isn't it?
I was a high school theater teacher for several years, and a middle school before that. And of course, everybody's, the stereotype is that everybody wants to be an actor. And so I actually taught at a very high performing high school with a Grammy award winning high school orchestra. And part of what I think is important is that people understand that being artistic is not something somebody can help. And there's benefit to art. There are many studies about the benefit of arts education and performance education for students. I don't care if you end up being an attorney, if you end up, being a scientist, the kind of problem solving and creativity, time management, things like that, that are about thinking on your feet, active listening, that are skills that are developed and required to create theater, are skills that are super important out in the professions. Um, so my focus in high school theater was, yes, okay, everybody who wants to act can act. Great. And some of you will make it lots of, from some of these high schools, the people have had wonderful acting and performance careers, but I always required that kids also learn the technical parts of theater, which often later on end up being I started as an actor, and I actually have grown to absolutely love and embrace the technical sides of theater because it involves every other art form. It involves the visual arts, the music, it involves sculpture, everything you can think of, puppetry. I mean, so having kids learn, or young people, I'm you can tell how old I am because I'm keep calling them kids. We hire lots of uh, young people who are about to graduate from college or have recently graduated, and they continue their education in our employ, so they're paid. They work with people who are more seasoned, with professional actors, with professional technical people, and often then we either lose them happily to go to grad school or to go on to work with bigger theaters. So I call our theater, I guess, professionally focused. We're a professional theater at the beginning training levels. We're an incubator. And then we get lots of very established actors and artists who are maybe in film. And most people in film or TV will tell you that their first love, of course, where they learned was theater. And so those people will come back and do plays in small, smaller theaters like ours. So we get those folks too. But yeah.
Well, lawyers are performing, and of course,
Yes.
especially trial lawyers, your stage is the courtroom, and
Yep.
you are giving a performance. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and it's like improv. It's largely unscripted.
Right.
Whatever script you think you can write for the thing, somebody else has got another way of looking at it and telling the same facts with a different story to it, and that's what makes it adversarial and sometimes very exciting and tense, and there's real drama unfolding.
The principles of improv I find are some of the most useful bases for both acting. I think all acting should start with improv. That is my own personal opinion. There's others who share it, because improv teaches you active learning. It teaches you to be super present, to let go of your ego and focus on the other. And then when you're in that frame of mind, whatever happens, you need to just respond honestly. And so mistakes are gifts, that everybody knows the stereotypical yes and, but if we did that in business, for the most part, that is a winning strategy. Instead of tearing stuff down, saying yes, and what if you respond like that to someone, it's much more empowering and it leads to discovery, right? So it's a great training for kids, for attorneys, sure, but anybody who's in business, who needs to sell, who needs to present, if you're in Rotary, that too. Any leadership. It's the improv is actually a really good base to have.
It's certainly fun too, and of course,
It is.
I did competitive speech and debate in high school and college, so
Okay.
the improv I got was not from doing her, prepared humorous interpretation. It was from doing extemporaneous impromptu speaking,
Hmm.
which along with debate, got me comfortable in front of any audience, large or small. But if you were to tell me, I need you to be Hamlet, you got a lot of stuff to memorize. That's why I didn't do theater, is that memorizing and keeping lines. To me, that was too much stress compared to being able to know what's in your head and be able to express it and just wing it as make it as you go. Because improv teaches you these ways of internally organizing and going along with a flow, or if you're starting at creating a flow, which business people really need to know how to do. They control negotiations,
Yeah.
for example, better
Yeah.
that way.
Sure. I mean, the thing is, the lines are need to be memorized, and I'm sure you're actually good at memorization. The improv, the work that you do that's like improv is what frees you from those lines to then bring them back from an honest place and have them shine, right? And that's true for any theater. So it's the marriage of the two that's just kind of brilliant. And it does the same thing whether you're giving a corporate speech or whatever, or a presentation, a closing argument. All those things are the same. They're basically the same thing. You're telling a
Yeah,
story.
absolutely.
So
It all goes back to
yeah.
the story. Sure.
Yep.
I
Yep.
mean, we could talk about this for another hour. We're just starting to roll on this, but time marches on for our podcast. So I want to cover something that I think is really important. It's certainly important to anybody in the arts and in local theater in particular, and that is why is it important for business people to support the arts and particularly the support needed today with theater, with all the cuts in grants and federal support and so on for the arts? Why do we need to keep this going strong, Beatrice?
I don't think it's in, if you were to ask me why we should continue to support the writing of literature or narrative fiction or narrative nonfiction even, telling stories um um creates empathy, creates understanding, opens understanding in ways that I mean, there's a bajillion scientific studies. If you want somebody to care about something, you need to tell them a story. And that's how empathy is born. And we are in serious need of that. I don't think it is a coincidence that I feel like art in our country has been kind of undervalued for a long time. We want to see only what we think we want to see. We don't want to be challenged. We need to get. I think that in a healthy society, you have all sorts of art. Some that you may not like, some that may speak to you, some of that makes you want to maybe figure out, do I want to see more of this? But it's what at its core, it asks people to think and challenge and make new connections. And I think that's absolutely necessary for for a healthy society. And you know, and art can be dangerous, right? It could feel subversive, but that's okay in a society that is strong, in a society that has discourse. There is room for ideas that may seem subversive. And because there's the preparation of other ideas, there's discourse, and that I think is what art does. Theater, but I don't think, I think theater does it powerfully because of it puts it on its feet and creates this kind of enveloping atmosphere for you. With humans in the room, there's all the studies that talk about the sympathetic response in terms of physiology, even that happens amongst audience members that are all sharing a live performance. So
That is true. The
that's
shared experience is still valuable. People don't go to the movies much anymore because you have big screens and streaming options at home. So that get-together experience, which used to be what everybody did every week when movies were cheap too. But
well,
now you don't see as much of that except in
yeah.
live theater.
I just saw Hamnet and loved it. I've seen a couple movies lately, and I feel like I need to get back to see more movies. But the thing that is different is that movie is going to be a barring, well, they don't even have film, so it's not like the film's going to break anymore. But it's always the same. Whatever performance you go for, a live symphony or a live theater performance, that is the only performance that exists. That the one you saw is the only one that exists like it ever again, because every single one is different, and crazy stuff happens, and that kind of flying without a safety net, that variation that is created every single night because the audience is an integral part. How every audience responds changes what the play or this or whatever is happening that night. It changes it. There's no way that it doesn't, especially in an intimate theater like we do. And so what you are creating, you're all creating together. And it only exists for that night. And I find that just exhilarating and super cool.
And it's a shared experience with strangers that, at least for the moment, is your community. So,
Right.
so theater, all the arts really, it's uplifting. It's imparting virtues and values, even with the most downer of subject matter or grimness of tragedy of performance. At the end of the day, in storytelling, there is the uplift. There's the messages. There are the takeaways that anybody who's paying attention to the performance can't
Catharsis. I mean, yeah.
help but get, right? So there is something in that for business people to be supporting local theater. It is tax deductible, and it's vital to keep within our community. So
I think it's a
tell us
way
how
to.
we support Ophelia's Jump, and where you are, and so on.
The other thing is art can be partner, right? I mean, your business, what you do in the community, being known as supporting the art, improves community well-being. There's lots of studies about that. And businesses that support arts in their community see higher tax revenues, all sorts of, for a higher business, because the art is a revenue generator. So how to support? Come. Butts and seats. Butts and seats is the most important thing, because from there you're meeting people. You're often finding new ways. We often partner with businesses. We might show the work of artists. We might find out that a business is involved with another nonprofit that maybe does social justice or community well-being kind of services, and we'll be able to amplify that for them, or give them ideas for doing other things that they weren't thinking about. We often partner with businesses that way. It's no longer just like give us money, although that's always nice. I think that the modern theater really looks to be a member, a partner with small businesses in the community to create a better experience, a better existence, and better health for everybody. So think of it that way.
That is very cool. So with that, Beatrice, I want to thank you for being my special guest on this edition of Professional of the Inland Empire. And we'll be back, ladies and gentlemen, with another episode next week. So stay tuned, subscribe, tell your friends, and promote the podcast. So long for now.
Thanks for watching or listening to, depending on the case, the Professionals of the Inland Empire show with your host, John W. Tulac. If you have a suggestion for a guest, email him at jwtulac, that's JWTULAC, @gmail.com. jwtulac @gmail.com.